Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth Be Told. Can you believe it? Episode 91. And we're so excited to be here. This month we're talking about developing ecological consciousness. And so we have a great program planned for you tonight, a few more steps and how we can continue to do that in our everyday lives. But first, I want to talk about something really special that is getting ready to come up. And this is our O-Shift Summit, Healing the Divide Summit. And so as you can see, this nifty graphic here, our virtual summit is going to be November 14th through the 17th. We did this last year and we had so much fun. We thought, wow, let's do it again and let's kind of make this a regular thing. So this year, we're going to be doing the O-Shift Healing the Divide, building on our question from last year, O-Shift, now what? And so we're going to be talking about how can we begin to bridge some of the division and divide and the things that we see in not only in our lives, but in our communities, in the world. So it's going to be a great time. And to that end, we would love the SEC community and all those in the sound of my voice to partner with us in sponsoring this event. So if this calls to you and you would love to join us in sponsoring this event, you can donate, and there's a text, a dollar amount and the word summit to 616-300-1227. And that there's also a link in the chat for you to also do that. And so this is a way for us as a community to partner and to sponsor this event. It's going to be so much fun. More details to come. All right, so let's talk about the fun that we're going to have tonight. So developing ecological consciousness. So tonight we're going to talk about some further steps in how we can do this, where it's not enough to be aware of our natural world and the things that we can do to make it a better place, but to really live from the space of consciousness. So tonight we're going to talk about listening, we're going to talk about courage, and we're going to talk about living the questions. And so through this process, we're going to learn how we can use all those steps to shift our perspective, shift our way of being, shift our way of doing things in a way that serves to support developing this ecological consciousness. So sit back and relax. Enjoy another episode of Truth Be Told.
Chapter we are going to look at this week is chapter 4, Listening, Gauging the Health of the Earth. No shock here, the author's message in this chapter is all about listening, but more importantly, learning how to listen in places where we are not used to listening. Primarily, the focus is on beginning to shift our listening in ways that are attuned to the world around us. Basically, as part of this world, Earth, we are in constant communication. And if we listen, Earth, as one complete organism, is in communication back. What is it that the body that we are a part of is saying? And how do we even begin to listen to it? Well, there are far too many examples discussed in this chapter to talk through all of them right now. Definitely worth the read, though. But we'll touch on just a few of them briefly right here. Birds. Apparently, birds are a simple way of attuning our listening skills. Migratory birds have told us a lot about the state of affairs throughout this larger body. With the life cycle of these species tied directly into numerous locations and microenvironments, it has become clear that the health of these migratory bird species can act as a barometer of sorts for the overall health of a variety of environments and other species. The not so great news, more than half of the North American forest-dwelling migratory species have experienced significant population declines in recent decades. The author discusses in great detail just how intricate the systems are that involve these birds. We are not separate from these systems, and, well, basically, the breakdown in the system is us. In reality, the issue is much larger than just the birds. We're actually amidst a mass extinction event in history. The Earth is losing species at a rate that is between 100 and 1,000 times greater than what the world has ever seen. More species have been lost in the last 100 years than over the combined history of life. And there's a very strong evidence that it is in large part due to human activity. This is not limited to just land either. We had mass detrimental effects on our oceans as well, and still do, when we remember that all of life exists in cycles of exchange, and we remember just how intertwined we are in those cycles. We are a part of it. It doesn't take long to realize that the oceans are not separate from us either. If there were no oceans, there would be no water cycle, no rain, no benign climates to live in. Similarly, the ocean is responsible for a significant amount of the oxygen that we breathe. Yet human behavior continues to destroy the habitats that sustain ocean-dwelling photosynthetic organisms. If you haven't, take a moment at some point to Google the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. There are actually 5 others just like it, islands of floating plastic garbage thrown away by humans that end up adrift at sea. So these are just a few of the examples throughout this chapter that demonstrate the messages that Earth, our larger body, is trying to convey. It is in pain. And when the world is in pain, well, so are we. And like we very often talk about here, for decades, our society has taught us to shut down and ignore our feelings, and for most, that has been the reality and experience of life. Emotions and feelings are not safe, and so we repress them. Well, hopefully we are learning how misguided that has been. In fact, we recently spent an entire month digging into the importance of emotions. But this ecological perspective is a whole other level of emotional interconnectedness. We have discussed before how important it is for our own well-being, and even to the well-being of our relationships with others, that we learn to be in touch with our emotions. But a healthy relationship with our emotions, it turns out, can't stop there. Repressing our emotions has had major environmental impact. As we begin to learn about and open our minds and hearts to the battered conditions of our home, planet Earth, some common responses are, why didn't anyone ever tell me about this before? I want to scream or cry when I think about what humans are doing to Earth. I care about Earth and what we are doing to it, but no one else seems to care. Well, as it turns out, there are actually hundreds of millions of people around the world that share in these same views. But so many, too many, are afraid of facing the emotions that come up when taking an honest look at what is happening. It brings up feelings of fear, helplessness, anger, and the most uncomfortable of all, pain. We are hardwired to avoid painful situations, and so it seems logical, in some respects, that we would attempt to avoid the pain and even the responsibility for what our larger collective is doing to inflict on the world we live in. But that's not really how it works. Being that we are not actually separate from Earth, we are not separate from its pain. Repressing the emotions that come up for us not only causes potential distress in ourselves, it exacerbates the distress and pain of our home, the organism that we are a part of. The purpose here is not to inflict new pain. Rather, it is to bring to consciousness the capped pain that I suspect we all carry to varying degrees. We need to learn how to care. The author is talking about compassion. He even offers that the solution for these seemingly massive worldwide issues is just compassionate listening, developing the skills, learning to listen to one another, not for response, not to debate, learning to listen compassionately, to give others a space to feel seen and heard. Sounds kind of familiar. There are 2 ways the author suggests that we can all begin practicing this type of compassionate listening. 1, go out into a natural setting and simply start paying attention. All that is required is to walk slowly. no jerky movements, just practice humility. Convey friendly intentions, ask permission of the wildlife to be in the space with them. Begin to notice how the animals act. Assume they are present, whether you see them or not. Begin to recognize them as individuals, not just as the species that they are. Consider yourself a part of, and simply observe the space you are in. 2, intentionally engage in compassionate listening with someone else, especially when what they have to share seems to oppose something that you believe. Do not listen to be right. Listen to hear what the message is underneath the judgment, underneath the opinions. Listen and ask compassionate questions. Reflect back what you are hearing them say. Now, I know for me, one of these exercises sounds a whole lot more appealing than the other, but I guess that is exactly why it is suggested. It is necessary in developing our listening skills, all of our listening skills, that we venture out of our comfort zone, that we develop the skills to be in touch with our own emotions and needs, and those of others, to develop a deeper sense of compassion. While we may feel hopeless or helpless when facing many of these ecological issues, there are real things that we can all do with rippling effects greater than we may realize. As the author says, in order to help the world, we need to learn how to care.
There are many steps to developing ecological consciousness, and one of those steps is courage. Now, in this context, the ability and willingness to make a shift, even in the face of dire and extreme circumstances or effects. The earth that we live in today is profoundly different from the earth our grandparents lived in. Not just from the perspective of iPhones and tablets, but different biologically and functionally. So just like when you're sick, you behave differently, and so it is with the earth. Just like when you're sick and need to pay attention to your body and what steps need to be taken to support it in its healing process, so it is with the earth. It can be easy to fall into denial and close our proverbial eyes to what is around us, or even say, hey, it doesn't affect me or my life. But this is in direct opposition of what we know to be true, not only in the physical, emotional, but spiritual level. That we are connected, not only to each other, but to the earth, to the universe. The blueprint of our very life is found in the blueprint of earth. When we're out of balance physically, emotionally, or spiritually, we can feel the effects. And whether consciously or unconsciously, we begin to engage in behaviors that serve to bring us back into balance, compensating or often overcompensating for this imbalance that we feel. And so just like us, the balanced blueprint of Earth can become disturbed. And you guessed it, humanity has been at the heart of this disruption. And so as we become more aware of our connection with the Earth, we begin to realize our impact. And then this realization creates space to do things differently, to see things differently. And so this is where courage enters stage left, because it takes courage to step out of old ways of seeing things, of doing things, whether it's in the context of our relationship to Earth and our environment, or how we view and interact with those around us. Now, I'm sure you've heard the adage, the way a person does one thing is the way a person does everything. Now, although this may sound a little like bumper sticker wisdom, I think there's truth in it. Our awareness of our impact in one area opens the door for greater awareness of our power and impact in other areas. So if I become more aware of my own carbon footprint and my impact on the earth, I begin to move and act in different ways. And this awareness then begins to seep into everything I do, heightening my awareness in other aspects of my life. And pretty soon, I'm living from a new state of awareness, a new way of seeing myself, of seeing others, and really seeing the world with new eyes. And so it's through this phenomenon that we can create reverberations far and wide, restoring balance within ourselves and the natural world that we're a part of, not separate from. We then become truth seekers, truth speakers, living from a new perspective, living from a space of courage. If you haven't already heard, there's a new wave of opportunity for community. Soul Evolution Collaborative's Second Sunday Experience, which by the way is every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, is a fun way to come together with folks, learn practical ways to apply spiritual principles, and a space to call home. A fun way to see and be seen. So come catch the wave. No previous experience required.
All right, so I'm talking about chapter 6, Living the Questions, and he's got so much information, we got to really jump in here. So, like when we talk about our ecological impact, we need to be asking better questions. So he uses an example. So like population growth, obviously a factor in our ecological imprint. Now, why is population growth going as high as it is? And the easy answer, or the answer that most people would jump to, is that because women are having more children. That's not the real answer. The real answer is that we are, created better medicines and vaccines, things that have also aided in childbirth. So more infants make it through the birthing process, all the way through it. And then more of those infants and children grow up to be adults than they used to in the past. And more adults, more children making it to adulthood, there's more people to have more babies. Just better survival rates have really added to this whole thing of greater and greater populations. Now, consumerism. Have you noticed how like the media refers to human beings as consumers quite frequently? No, that's no mistake, and it's part of that whole process. We are constantly being marketed to $200 billion a year in the US just simply to make us think that we need things. And then he goes on to explain a little bit about how like the things we buy, the environmental impact that maybe we don't always think about. When you're talking about like if you eat beef, like how much water does it take to keep the cow hydrated, and then how much water for the grain that it eats, and then in the processing, and then in the transportation. That cow has been transported all so many times throughout its life right up to the end, and then even after it has been created into a product that then is refrigerated, stored, shipped. All these different things all have impact. The oil that it takes to get that cow moved around, so many different things. All this also depletes the soil, on and on. And he uses a good example of a water bottle, all the resources that go into making one plastic bottle that we then fill with water to then sell it, when that water is even lower quality quite often than just the tap water that we get. And as a matter of fact, like 25% of the time, it is just tap water that we are then buying back in a plastic bottle because they told us that it's better than regular water. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Now, all of this stuff adds up into our ecological footprint. And what's interesting is, they have determined, like by what we consume, how many acres of resources does it require for us to sustain that. Now, average USA, it takes for the average American about 20 acres to produce the resources that we need for our what we consume. That's about twice what they use in the United Kingdom, and it's like 8 times what they use in India. So yeah, of course, Americans are really leading that thing. Now it's interesting, it correlates directly with income. So while it's 20 acres for the average American, it's about 50 for an American who earns $200,000 a year. And it's only about 10 for somebody that only earns $20,000 a year. The more we earn, the more things we buy. And that's part of this cycle that the author describes as crave, acquire, relief. We crave the newest things. We crave, a cool gizmo that we see somebody else have. We crave things that, we think are going to make our life easier, or we think are going to make us happier. So we crave them. And then as soon as we get them, we get relief. But then, are we getting relief because we have that thing? Or is it just relief from the craving? Either way, we know that that relief is temporary, and it's not long before we get to that craving of the next thing. And it just creates this cycle and cycle. Does that make us happier? Nope. All right, so there's a thing called the Happy Planet Index, the HPI. This was created by New Economics Foundation. And it's a sociological survey conducted worldwide to determine what makes people happier. And it's not what you would think. It's definitely not acquiring more and more stuff. It's interesting. Costa Rica had the highest HPI, and they have their acreage, ecological footprint is about 1/3 the size of the average Americans. So with a lot less consumerism and yet the highest HPI. United States of America, we ranked 105th on this list. And that's out of, I don't know how many, if they did 270 countries, but 105th in HPI, Happy Planet Index. So the United States has something to learn from these other places. Now, how do we increase our HPI? This is interesting. Let's listen to this. Number 1, connecting with others. Sounds like creating community to me, right? Number 2, increased physical activity. That makes sense. Number 3, noticing your surroundings. Like when we're talking about living everyday wonder and looking around in nature, makes sense. 4, continuing to learn. Hello, what are we doing here? We're constantly learning as Soul Evolution Collaborative. This is what we're always doing. And then number 5, we're giving time and attention to others. These are the things that create genuine happiness in our minds and in our lives. So the things that we really would, bring more happiness into our life are the things that we are trying to do. So you're here at the right place. Thanks for watching this, and just continue. Let's keep creating this community and asking questions. That's the way we learn more and more about our environment and how we can make better use of it all and really create that world that works for everyone.
Hey, y'all.
Hey,
Hey,
that was fun.
that was fun.
Yeah. I find it extremely notable, these 3 chapters, just how in parallel this man's writing is with the universal principles that we believe and talk about and teach all the
Told
time.
ya.
I mean, and I knew, it was obvious in the first 3 chapters, oh yeah, this is so in alignment with what we're doing. And these 3 chapters have been oh, that's literally what we talk about. We spent a whole 3 months on emotions, body, relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are in nature, and it's like revisiting the last 3 months but from a totally different perspective. And courage, the courage to show up, the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to have those conversations where we are practicing those skills of listening to people. It's word and the question, being curious. We talk about that all the time.
Even the courage to say, oh wow, I really was off the mark my whole life. Now the courage to say, oh, okay, now I know something differently, or my eyes have been open to something, and then moving in that direction. Because I think, well, at least I can only speak for myself. things come into my awareness and I'm like, oh my goodness, I never thought about that.
Mm.
Well, then, I really need to make some adjustments on how I'm moving about the world or moving about in my relationships. And then I sometimes then slide right back into the, oh yeah, okay, and it's this awareness over and over again. But I think it's a courage to do that, and it's a courage to step out in new ways, step out in ways that may be uncomfortable, live in those questions, like Chris said. I mean, the being curious. I thought it was very that Happy Planet Index. I thought that was very interesting. Just the things that, when we read in a book or we see it in a documentary or like on the internet, we're like, oh wow. But yeah, of course, community and moving our body in ways that feel good to us. Being aware of our surroundings and being intentional about our movement in them. I mean, yeah, like those. It's like an aha moment every time we see that. But it's like at some point we're going to begin to learn that really is the key. Those things.
Yeah.
You mean like if we actually do the things?
Details.
Yeah, this whole month on nature, I mean, it's been powerful. I love, like that idea, like, yeah, just get out in nature and just, listening, like, Reverend Dan's segment, it said, just getting out. And, I loved in the book when he offered the idea of like, and you're going into like the animal space. And when you sit, and just be still, he's like, you'll start to see the activity. You'll start to feel, like more safe. But like introducing yourself, or you're like asking like, hey, can I come into your space? And, it seems, kind of a tree hugger-ish, but that's good. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that we've just learned how that nature interacts with us, and that, treating it as part of us, as part of, worthy of that just respect. And it was a great example that he used with the, was it a baboon tribe? I'm forgetting now. It was the person that observed the,
oh yeah,
the baboons, and then it got to a point where they recognized each individual one of like over 100 in that tribe. And once she got to that place of recognizing them all, is when like the head or the alpha baboon like acknowledged her, recognized her. And
I got kind of nervous at that point in the book, to be honest, because that baboon initiated like the mating sequence or something.
Yeah.
I was like, and that was the point where you got up and ran away, right?
But yeah, I like the way that she, addressed it and like, respectfully declined in a way that the baboon tribe recognized. And it was, it was pretty cool.
Well, and I think it's something that we talked about over the last week actually, but this the biomimicry that we, when we go and when we listen or we observe the natural world, we see these systems working in conjunction and supporting one another. And it's like we can take what we're observing from those spaces and then kind of superimpose them on our own lives. We just really have so much to learn. I mean, I can sit out and on my patio and watch these birds. I know y'all have heard about the birds. We've got a lot of birds over here. I'm just telling you, but it's interesting because, and squirrels too, but they work in like families, and then you can see them kind of like watching out for one another. One stands guard while the other one's eating the nuts, or, and just kind of working or making sure, they have the courtship feeding that these birds do. I mean, just making sure that the group is kind of taken care of and supported. And so it's really interesting, and that comes natural. It's not a forced thing, or it's not a thing of like, hey, look at me, I'm helping folks. But it's like this kind of natural rhythm. And I think it is our natural rhythm to show up in supportive ways, to show up in ways that support ourselves, to show up in ways that support others. That's the natural rhythm. And I think this developing ecological consciousness is really going back to our natural rhythms that we've gotten away from, consumerism and this kind of like take mindset that we often have. And I think it's just going back to those natural things.
Well, and I love how the solution to that, like the way back, is just through these really basic, like, it's, I mean, yeah, like, do we need to go and clean the plastic out of the ocean? Yes, like that needs to happen.
Right.
That's not for every single one of us to do. So like for each one of us, talking in this conversation and just like easily feeling helpless, like, well, what am I gonna do, right? There are such easy and real steps to take.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, it's not about actually going out and doing the ecology thing. I mean, it can be, but just like engaging in conversation with someone about, like, just listening to someone who you normally would just brush off because you disagree with them, right? Just being courageous enough to actually face the feelings. Like when I was reading through this in preparation for my segment this week, it was like I could sense the emotions coming up in me reading about the things happening. Like there were so many more instances listed in the book that I didn't even get into in that segment, and it was painful. It was really painful, and I was really feeling it. Like I almost put the book down. Like I was like, I have to get through this because we said we would, but it was fascinating. Then I mean, like literally, like 2 pages later, that's the thing he's talking about. He's like, yeah, the earth is in pain, so it's natural that we feel that pain because we're not separate from it. And talking about, it's like, oh, the very things that we talk about on the things that we talk about on a regular basis are the solution to the ecological issues. And might that take 100 years? That's the long game. Like we are training a new way of being. It's almost like training a whole new generation, and the next generation, the next generation, the next and the next. I mean, it'd go on forever, but it's like the short game. Yeah, let's clean up the plastic. Let's stop all the, CO2 emissions and all of those things. Absolutely. Let's hold the corporations accountable, whatever. But as individuals, the things that we can do are just so simple. And I was like, I would have never, I think in a million years, put together that the things that we talk about on a weekly basis are actually the solution to making that change. And it just seems so obvious right now.
Well, and like he talked, Christopher Uhl in the book talked about is like, when we're out of balance, we feel it. We feel it in our bodies. We feel it in everything, physically and emotionally, spiritually, all those areas. And the same with earth, and exactly what you said. I mean, it is a living, moving, breathing thing that we are in. And yeah, I think we feel that, what we're feeling, the imbalances we feel are reflected in the earth. The imbalances the earth feels are reflected in us and how we interact. And you can feel it. It's like this hum, And I think, that's, when we're talking about the summit that we're going to have in November, it's addressing that hum, that hum under the surface of imbalance and discord and everybody going in all sorts of ways. And it's just addressing that. And I think when we start addressing that kind of that low level hum that we've just gotten used to, oh yeah, that's the way it is. That's the way those people are. That's the way, those sorts of things that we use. I think when we start addressing that, then we're going to start to see a return, a balance. And I think that it will then impact how we show up in the activity in the world. And then that impacts, it's like this reverberation of this experience just over and over and over and over and out and out.
So in that same way that like everything is connected, that we're seeing how, like one part of our ecology gets a little out of whack, how it affects so many other parts. And like you were talking, Rev Ryan, that like when one part of that balances out, you feel it in other spots. And then on the flip side, in a positive, like optimistic note, like when you, like in your own personal life, when, body, mind, soul, when something's a little out of whack and you're feeling it in other areas and you take a step in the right direction, you feel even just that tiniest little step. So like Reverend Dan was talking about, like, maybe getting out into the ocean and, cleaning up those giant floating heaps of plastic isn't yours to do. And it's also quite a project, but what is yours to do? And anything, like even the smallest thing, if it's just a little if it's outside of what you normally would have done, like if, hearing this message, and then tomorrow you're walking down the street and you see a piece of garbage that would have, eventually floated into the gutters and ended up in wherever. And just because you heard something and out of your norm, you go and pick that up and get it into a garbage can. That's the smallest thing, but it's something out of your norm. It is a step in that right direction, and it's not necessarily like an altruistic thing either, because you feel a little better knowing like, hey, that one little patch of the earth looks better now.
Yeah.
And
well, and then like when you begin to notice, like you notice that thing on the ground, then you notice something else.
Yeah.
And then maybe you notice a coworker who is having a hard time. You can just kind of see it in their body language. Or maybe you notice someone in your community that needs assistance in this way. It's like once you start noticing one thing, then you start noticing all these other things. And that's what happens. So then that that action is not small, because then it creates this little crack. And then all the other stuff rushes in, and more crack. And it's like this, then it's this huge kind of gush of all this awareness. And then now you're totally living from a space that you weren't living from, last week. And so I think that's the way it is. It's not this, I think sometimes we get, or at least I can just speak for myself, I get overwhelmed because I want to see the end result. And I can't see it. It's so far away. I can't see it. and then I think we get paralyzed and think, oh, well, it's never going to change. So I'm just going to just whatever, and not, but it's not like that. It's like these incremental changes that we can step into, and then step into another thing, and then step into another thing. And before long, we're seeing the changes. We're seeing the things, we're creating the things that we want to see in the world.
And isn't it fascinating too how I see this play out kind of in microcosm, like my personal journey, macrocosm also playing out in the world, how at the same time, it's also really easy because there's not that giant leap forward. Like I would love to, like the end destination right now, like snap, poof, done. Right. And instead it's this like plot. and it's really, I find for me, it's really easy to miss the mile markers along the way, the scenic views that invite me to stop and look back and be like, yo, that's where you started. You're here now.
Right.
And then keep going and like every once in a while, just turn around. It's easy to miss that and then get to like that one summit where it's like, oh man, like we started all the way down there. Right. And I think that same thing is true, for society. Like, in so many ways, there's been such progress made in the last 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200. Like, there's been such progress. And at the same time, it's like, yeah, but we're not there yet. Like, we have our eyes set on that summit. And I guarantee you, when we get to that summit, there's a bigger mountain behind it. Right. But we're like, that's where we're going. And so we have I have my eyes set there, and it's really easy to miss because it's like that last climb, that last leg of the trip is like steep. We've been kind of zigzagging, a little bit for, a lot of it, but like that last piece, it's really hard. So we're like, man, this shit's all messed up. Instead of being like, oh yeah, we're there and we need to do that. Like, and there's still this work, but it's a fascinating journey, isn't it?
And that's the value of these conversations. And, we're doing it this month, and just, the more we talk about it and the more we talk about it with one another, the more things we see. And then the more possibilities we are made aware of, which is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, pretty cool thing. Good stuff.
So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Man, it's a lot of fun to see this idea of developing ecological consciousness and how we can gain new perspectives and apply that to our lives. So this week, the 3 steps that we talked about this week. So listen more, have some courage, step out in new ways, and live the question, live the curiosity. And as we worked on this together, as we began to open the door to new ways of being, new ways of seeing, I tell you, the possibilities are limitless. So have a great week, and we'll see you back here next Tuesday.